The crystal chandeliers of the Astor estate cast cold diamonds of light across 300 guests in black tie and couture. Marcus Webb stood at the center of it all, his smile a perfect mask of hospitality, his handshake firm enough to remind every senator and syndicate boss in attendance exactly who controlled the room. The champagne was vintage Krug. The orchestra played Vivaldi. The security detail numbered 42 men, all ex-military, all personally vetted by his head of operations, and yet something was wrong. Marcus couldn't name it. The sensation crawled along his spine like a spider's leg, subtle, insistent, ignored by the rational part of his brain that insisted the evening was flawless. He had spent 6 months orchestrating this gathering, a celebration of his consolidation of the Northeast Corridor's shipping interests, a public display of legitimacy that would make his enemies think twice. Every detail had been accounted for, every potential threat neutralized. So why did his pulse keep spiking? He excused himself from a conversation with the governor's chief of staff and made his way toward the terrace, needing air. The night was unseasonably warm for October, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the East River like a promise of permanence. He leaned against the wrought iron railing and closed his eyes, forcing his breathing to slow. Mr. Webb, the voice was small, tremulous. He turned and looked down at a boy stood in the doorway leading back inside. No more than 5 years old, dressed in the crisp uniform of the household staff's children, his dark eyes too large for his thin face. Marcus recognized him immediately, Carlos, the son of Elena, his head housekeeper. The boy had the run of the estate's lower floors, invisible to guests, a ghost in the margins of the empire. "What is it, Carlos?" Marcus kept his voice soft. The child had a reputation among the staff for being unusually perceptive, prone to noticing things that adults missed. Elena had mentioned it once, apologetically, as if it were a failing rather than a gift. Carlos stepped closer, his small hands twisting the fabric of his uniform. "Mr. Webb, you need to check the wine cellar." Marcus felt the spider's leg crawl up his neck again. The wine cellar? Why? The men in the gray suits. They went down there an hour ago. They had boxes. The boy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. They took the boxes from the blue room. The blue room with the red door. The blue room with the red door. Marcus felt his stomach turn to ice. That was the private study where he kept the Empire's most sensitive documents, shipping manifests, financial records, the names of every compromised official on his payroll. Only 4 people had access. Himself, his operations chief Dominic, his legal counsel Morgan, and Dominic's second-in-command, a man named Vasquez who had been with the organization for 5 years, who had risen through the ranks on a reputation for ruthless efficiency and absolute loyalty. "Carlos," Marcus said, kneeling to the boy's level, his voice barely controlled. "Why did you come to me with this? Why didn't you tell your mother?" The child's face crumpled slightly, and Marcus saw fear flash in those 2 large eyes. "The gray suit men said they would hurt Mama if she saw them. They said all the servants would be hurt if we told anyone. But I saw you standing alone, and I thought—" He trailed off, his lip trembling. Marcus forced himself to stay calm. The child's warning was specific, actionable, and terrifyingly plausible. But he needed more before he acted. What did the boxes look like? Were they heavy? Did the men seem nervous? They had numbers on them. Black numbers, like the ones on the machines in the kitchen. Carlos's brow furrowed in concentration. "And one of them dropped a piece of paper. I picked it up after they left. I didn't know what it was, but I thought it might be important." The boy reached into his pocket and produced a crumpled receipt. Marcus took it with hands that had not trembled in 20 years, not since he'd watched his father die in a warehouse fire orchestrated by men who had sworn loyalty to him. The receipt was for industrial-grade thermite, purchased 2 days ago, delivered to a warehouse in Newark that Marcus knew belonged to a shell company controlled by Vasquez's brother-in-law, thermite. The substance that could burn through concrete, through steel, through the reinforced floor of a wine cellar that happened to be directly beneath the main ballroom. The substance that, if ignited properly, would collapse the entire east wing of the estate, burying 300 guests in a tomb of crystal and champagne and shattered chandeliers. The spider's leg became a knife. Marcus looked at Carlos. The boy was watching him with an expression far too adult for his face, Not fear anymore, but calculation. As if he were cataloging Marcus's reaction, filing it away for future reference. "Carlos," Marcus said slowly, "how long have you known about the gray suit men?" The child's face flickered. "I saw them before. In the mansion. They came at night sometimes, when everyone was sleeping. They met with Mr. Vasquez in the East Library." "Did you tell anyone?" "Your mother?" "No." The word was quiet but firm. "My mother would be scared." "And Mr. Vasquez said." The child's voice broke slightly. "He said if I told anyone, he would send me away from my mother. He said he could do that. That he was important." Marcus felt something cold and murderous settle in his chest. Vasquez had threatened a 5-year-old child, had used that threat to ensure his silence, to keep the boy's observations hidden, to let the conspiracy proceed without interruption, and the child had still come forward. Had still risked everything to warn the man who controlled his world, his mother's employment, the fragile security of their lives. "Can you show me where they went?" Marcus asked. "The wine cellar entrance they used." Carlos nodded, his small hand reaching out to take Marcus's. "It's the staircase behind the kitchen. The one with the broken light." As the boy led him through the service corridors, past startled kitchen staff and confused security guards, Marcus's mind raced through the implications. Vasquez, who had access to everything, who knew the security protocols, who had the means to bypass them. Dominic, who had vouched for him personally, who might be complicit or might be compromised. The 300 guests, including the governor, the attorney general, every major player in the Northeast shadow economy, all gathered in one place, all vulnerable. The timing was perfect. The method was devastating. The scale of the betrayal was almost inconceivable, and the only reason Marcus had any warning at all was a child who had been paying attention when everyone else had been too arrogant to see. The staircase was exactly where Carlos had described it, a narrow spiral of rusted iron behind the enormous commercial refrigerators. The light fixture at the top had been deliberately smashed, the bulb gone, casting the entire shaft into near-total darkness. Marcus could hear voices from below, low, tense, arguing over something. "What do you mean the charges aren't wired?" That was Vasquez, his voice sharp with frustration. "We have 40 minutes until the main course. The timing has to be perfect. We need another 30 minutes to complete the connection." An unfamiliar voice, probably the thermite delivery man. "The wiring in these old cellars is a nightmare. If we rush it, the charges might not detonate simultaneously, and half the building could survive the collapse." "Then rush it anyway." Vasquez again, his tone flat and cold. "I don't care about building survival. I care about Webb's survival. He must be dead by midnight." Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over the emergency alert that would summon his security team. But he hesitated. If he gave the order now, Vasquez would hear the commotion and detonate prematurely, or escape through one of the secret exits that Marcus himself had designed. And the child was still with him, still clutching his hand, still watching him with those two large eyes. He needed a different approach. "Carlos," he whispered, "do you know another way out of the cellar?" "A way they don't know about." The child nodded, his expression grave. "There's a tunnel. The one the old servants used to use. It goes to the greenhouse." He paused. "I found it when I was hiding from the gray suit men. They don't know about it." Of course they don't, Marcus thought. Because you're a child, and no one pays attention to children. No one sees them, hears them, takes them seriously. "Until they're the only ones who can save you, stay close to me," he said. "Don't let go of my hand. And whatever you hear, don't make a sound." The next 30 minutes would determine whether Marcus Webb lived or died, whether his empire would stand or fall, whether 300 people would survive the night or be buried in the ruins. And as he followed a 5-year-old boy through the dark tunnels beneath his own estate, Marcus began to understand the true nature of power, not in the force he could command, the money he could spend, the enemies he could destroy, but in the quiet loyalty of those who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, those who saw the truth because they were too insignificant to be noticed, those who chose courage over fear despite every reason to choose otherwise. In the cold darkness, with the child's small hand warm in his, Marcus Webb made a promise to himself. If he survived this night, He would never be that blind again. He would never be that arrogant. He would never dismiss the quiet observers, the overlooked witnesses, the invisible protectors who made his world possible. And he would make Vasquez pay for every single moment of fear he had put into this child's eyes. The tunnel was narrower than Marcus remembered. He had designed the escape routes himself 15 years ago, back when he was still consolidating power, still paranoid enough to believe that every ally was a potential enemy. The tunnels had been built to accommodate a grown man in a crouch, but years of neglect had allowed the earth to shift, the supports to warp. Now he moved in a painful half-crawl, one hand gripping Carlos's small fingers, the other braced against the damp stone wall. The child moved like a shadow. No hesitation, no fear. He knew every twist in the dark, every route that might trip a careless foot, every low-hanging beam that could crack a skull. Marcus followed in silence, his mind working through the implications of what he had just heard. Vasquez wanted him dead by midnight. That meant the thermite charges were set to detonate during the main course, when the guests would be seated in the East Ballroom directly above the wine cellar. The timing was deliberate, not just assassination, but spectacle. 300 witnesses. Every powerful figure in the Northeast wiped out in a single stroke. The chaos would be absolute. The power vacuum would be immediate. And Vasquez would be standing in the rubble, ready to fill it. Marcus's jaw tightened. He had made Vasquez. Plucked him from a dockside crew in Brooklyn, given him a chance, trained him, trusted him. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. A knife in the back from a man who owed him everything, but the anger would have to wait. Survival came first. They emerged from the tunnel into the greenhouse's service shed, the glass walls of the main conservatory visible through a grime-caked window. Marcus straightened with a groan, his spine protesting the cramped position. Carlos stood beside him, pale but steady, watching him with that unnerving adult calm. "Now what?" the child asked. Marcus pulled out his phone. No signal in the tunnel, but here, in the open air, the bars flickered to life. He typed a quick message to Dominic, not the full truth, just a single line. Vasquez compromised. East wine cellar. Move quiet. Detain anyone in gray. He hit send and waited. 30 seconds passed. A minute. No response. Marcus's stomach tightened. Dominic was either dead, compromised, or in on the conspiracy. None of the options were good. He sent the same message to Morgan, his legal counsel, a man who had no operational authority but possessed an unshakable loyalty that had survived a decade of close calls and narrow escapes. The response came almost immediately. Understood. Moving. Morgan was in the ballroom. Morgan was in the middle of 300 people with no security training, no weapon, no backup. And he was walking into a trap that Marcus had barely begun to understand. "Stay here," Marcus said to Carlos, his voice flat and hard. "Do not move. Do not make a sound. If you hear anything, anyone, you go back into the tunnel, and you don't come out until I find you. Understand?" The child nodded, but his eyes were fixed on something behind Marcus. A flicker of movement near the greenhouse's main entrance. Marcus turned slowly, his hand moving to the concealed holster at his hip. A figure emerged from the shadows, small, slight, dressed in the gray uniform of the kitchen staff. Marcus's hand closed around his weapon, but before he could draw, the figure stepped into the dim light, and he saw her face, Elena, Carlos's mother, his head housekeeper, the woman who had run his household for 7 years, who had never missed a single detail, who had organized every party, every meeting, every delicate social arrangement with a precision that bordered on the inhuman. And she was holding a kitchen knife. "Elena," Marcus said carefully, his hands raised slightly. "What are you doing here?" Her face was a mask of terror and resolve. She looked past him to her son, and something in her expression shifted. Relief, then fury, then a cold determination that Marcus had never seen in her before. "I saw Vasquez," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was in the kitchen. He was talking to the security guards. He told them to seal the main exits. He said there was a bomb threat. He said they had to evacuate the guests through the east doors." Marcus felt the world tilt. The east doors led directly to the east wing. directly to the wine cellar. Directly to the thermite charges. Vasquez wasn't planning to kill the guests. He was planning to move them, corral them into a single space where the blast would be even more devastating. A massacre, framed as a failed evacuation, with Vasquez as the hero who had tried to save them. He's going to blame you, Elena said, her voice shaking. He told the guards it was your idea, that you were the one who wanted to bring the guests to the East Wing. He said you were paranoid, that you thought there was a bomb in the West Wing, that you ordered the evacuation to protect yourself. Marcus closed his eyes. The frame was elegant, ruthless, and almost perfectly constructed. Vasquez had planned for every contingency, had accounted for every variable, had turned Marcus's own security protocols into weapons against him, except for one variable. Elena, Marcus said slowly, how long have you known about the conspiracy? Her face crumpled. I didn't know. Not really. I saw things, strange things. Vasquez coming to the estate at odd hours. Boxes being moved. Men in gray suits who didn't belong. But I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was just business. I was too afraid to ask questions. Too afraid to lose my job. Too afraid. She broke off, her eyes darting to her son. He threatened Carlos. 3 weeks ago. He told me if I said anything, if I told anyone, he would make sure my son disappeared. I believed him. I still believe him. He has people everywhere. Elena. Marcus stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Listen to me. Your son came to me tonight. He told me everything. He warned me about the wine cellar. He led me through the tunnel. He saved my life. The housekeeper's eyes widened. She looked at her child, and Marcus saw the conflict play across her face. Pride, terror, love, and something deeper. Shame. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know he saw. I didn't know he's smarter than both of us, Marcus said. He's braver than both of us. And right now, I need both of you to help me stop Vasquez before 300 people die in a building that's about to collapse. Elena's grip on the knife tightened. What do you need me to do? Marcus looked at her, then at Carlos. The child was watching him with those two large eyes, waiting, ready. The security guards are Vasquez's people, Marcus said. But there are 42 of them, and not all of them will be loyal to him.
Some of them are still mine.
I need you to find out which ones. Elena, you know the staff. You know who talks to whom. Who's been nervous lately. Who's been avoiding eye contact.
Elena nodded slowly.
And Carlos. Marcus knelt to the boy's level. I need you to do something else. Something harder. Carlos met his gaze, without flinching. What? Vasquez has a hostage, Marcus said. Someone he's using to control Dominic. Dominic hasn't responded to my messages, and that means he's either dead or being forced to cooperate. I need to know where Vasquez is keeping him. I need to know where the secondary explosives are. I need you to go back into the estate and find out. The child's face was pale, but his voice was steady. What if I get caught? Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. Then you tell them you were lost. You were looking for your mother. You're a child, Carlos. No one will suspect you. No one ever suspects children. It was cruel, using the boy this way. But Marcus had no other choice. The conspiracy was too advanced, the stakes too high, the network of betrayal too dense. He needed eyes inside. He needed a witness who could see without being seen. Carlos looked at his mother, then back at Marcus. Okay, he said. I'll do it. Elena made a sound, a choked sob, quickly suppressed. But she didn't argue. She didn't refuse. She just knelt beside her son and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight for a long, silent moment. Marcus watched them, and something cracked in his chest. He had built an empire on the backs of people like this, quiet, loyal, invisible. He had taken their service for granted. He had never really seen them, not until tonight. I'll get them both out, he said quietly. I swear to you, whatever happens tonight, I will protect your family. Elena looked up at him, her eyes wet but steady. You do that, she said, and you'll have my loyalty for the rest of my life.
She didn't need to say it.
Her loyalty had already been given. It was his that was being tested now. And Marcus Webb stood up and looked toward the estate, its lights blazing against the October night. Somewhere in that gilded cage, A conspiracy was reaching its climax. Somewhere in that chaos, an innocent child was about to walk into the heart of it, and somewhere in the ruins of his empire, Marcus was going to find the strength to save what mattered. He had to. There was no other choice that Carlos moved through the service corridors like a ghost. He had spent his entire life learning to be invisible, not because anyone had taught him, but because invisibility was the only way to survive. When the adults argued, he disappeared. When the gray suit men came, he found corners to curl into, shadows to melt through. He had learned to read footsteps, to distinguish between the heavy tread of security and the lighter step of kitchen staff, to know exactly which floorboards creaked and which doors stuck in their frames. Now he put all of that knowledge to use. The main kitchen was chaos. Servers rushed back and forth, balancing trays of canapes and champagne flutes, their faces strained with the pressure of serving 300 guests. Carlos slipped between them, a small body moving against the current, and ducked through the service door that led to the east corridor. The gray suit men were everywhere. He counted 6 of them, stationed at intervals along the hallway, their eyes scanning the doors, their hands resting on the bulges beneath their jackets. They were looking for something or someone. Carlos pressed himself flat against the wall, his heart hammering, and watched them from the shadows. They didn't see him.
Of course they didn't.
He was a child, and children were furniture. Background noise. Invisible, he moved again, darting from doorway to doorway, tracking their patterns. Every 3 minutes, the nearest guard walked to the end of the hallway and back. That gave Carlos a window of roughly 90 seconds to move past him. He counted the seconds in his head, the way his mother had taught him, and when the guard turned his back, Carlos ran. The East Library was 3 doors down. He slipped inside, closing the door behind him with barely a click, and pressed his ear against the wood. Voices. 2 of them. One was Vasquez, his tone sharp and impatient. The other was Dominic, Marcus's operations chief, his voice strained, almost pleading. "You can't do this," Dominic was saying. 300 people. Children. Families. This isn't what we agreed to. We agreed to take Webb out. Vasquez's voice was cold, dismissive. We agreed to dismantle his network. The collateral damage is a necessary cost of doing business. The collateral damage is my wife. Dominic's voice cracked. You promised she would be safe. You promised. And she'll be safe, as long as you cooperate. Vasquez's tone shifted, suddenly smooth, almost gentle. Everything is proceeding according to plan. The guests are being moved to the East Wing. Webb is being framed. By midnight, the world will believe that Marcus Webb panicked, that he caused a catastrophic accident while trying to protect himself from a non-existent threat. Dominic was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. And my wife, when do I get to see her? When the operation is complete. Not before. Vasquez's footsteps moved across the room. Now stop wasting my time. The charges are armed. We have 20 minutes until detonation. I need you to go to the East Ballroom and make sure the evacuation is proceeding properly. Carlos felt something cold settle in his stomach. 20 minutes. The child's mind raced through the implications, the time it would take to reach Marcus, the time it would take to warn everyone, the time it would take to disarm the explosives that Vasquez had already armed. He needed more information. He needed to know where Dominic's wife was being held, because that was the only leverage that mattered. That was the key to breaking Dominic's cooperation, to turning him back into an ally, but the conversation was ending. He could hear footsteps approaching the door. Carlos moved. He dove behind a heavy velvet curtain, his body pressed against the cold marble windowsill, and held his breath. The door opened. Dominic stepped out, his face pale and drawn, and walked down the hallway without looking back. Carlos waited until his footsteps faded, then slipped out from behind the curtain and moved to the window. The view was familiar. He had stood here before on other nights, watching the estate's grounds from above. But tonight, something was different. The greenhouse. It was 100 yards away, its glass panels catching the moonlight. And in the shadow of its service shed, he could see a figure, small, frantic, pacing back and forth. His mother done beside her, Marcus Webb, his phone pressed to his ear, his face hard with concentration that Carlos needed to get back to them. He needed to tell them about Dominic's wife, about the 20 minutes, about the armed charges. But the gray suit men were still in the hallway, and the only other exit from the East Library led through the private study. The blue room with the red door that Vasquez had searched earlier. The blue room with the red door. Carlos turned and crossed the library in 3 quick strides. The door to the study was unlocked. He had seen Vasquez leave it that way, careless in his confidence. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The study was a wreck. Drawers had been pulled out, papers scattered across the floor, the safe behind the painting left gaping and empty. Vasquez had taken everything Marcus had stored here, the financial records, the shipping manifests, the names of compromised officials. But Carlos wasn't looking for those. He was looking for a phone, a computer, anything that could connect him to Marcus. And then he saw it. A small tablet, half hidden under a pile of documents on the desk. Marcus's personal tablet, the one he used for private communications. Carlos had seen it before, countless times, on the desk in the main office. It must have been left here earlier, forgotten in the chaos. He grabbed it and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, showing a recent message from an unknown number. She's in the underground garage. Sublevel 2. 7 guards, rotating every 5 minutes. You have 20 minutes. After that, the charges detonate and all evidence disappears. Carlos read the message twice, committing it to memory. Dominic's wife was in the garage. 20 minutes until the detonation. That was the leverage, the hostage, the key to everything. He tucked the tablet into his uniform and moved back to the door. The gray suit men were still in the hallway, but their pattern had shifted. Now they were moving toward the east wing, herding the guests like cattle. Carlos waited until the last of them disappeared around the corner, then ran. The service corridors were empty now. Everyone was in the main halls, managing the evacuation, following orders that Vasquez had given them. Carlos moved faster than he had ever moved before, his small legs pumping, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He burst out of the kitchen exit and crossed the lawn to the greenhouse, his mother's arms catching him before he could speak. Carlos. Dios mío, where were you? I was so scared. No time. Marcus's voice cut through her panic. What did you find? Carlos pulled out the tablet, his hand shaking. Dominic's wife is in the underground garage. Sublevel 2. 7 guards. And Vasquez said. He paused, forcing himself to breathe. Vasquez said the charges are armed. We have 20 minutes before they detonate. Marcus took the tablet, reading the message with a speed born of long practice. His face was pale, but his eyes were lit with something Carlos hadn't seen before, not fear, but cold, focused rage. 20 minutes, Marcus repeated. That's not enough time to disarm the charges. Not enough time to evacuate the East Wing safely. But it's enough time to do something else. Elena looked at him, her arms still wrapped around her son. What? Marcus met her gaze, and Carlos saw something shift in his expression. The mask was gone. In its place was a man who had reached the end of his options and found something else entirely. A direct approach, Marcus said. Vasquez expects me to be dead or fleeing. He doesn't expect me to walk right up to him and demand answers. But that's exactly what I'm going to do. Carlos stepped forward. I'm coming with you.
No.
Marcus's voice was firm. You've done enough. You've done more than enough. Now you and your mother need to get as far from the estate as you can. Carlos shook his head. He'll kill you. He has guards everywhere. He has a 5-year-old boy who just outsmarted his entire operation. Marcus knelt to Carlos's level, his eyes steady. I've been in this world for 30 years, Carlos. I've survived assassination attempts, betrayals, wars that would make your blood run cold. But I've never met anyone like you. You have something I lost a long time ago. He paused, and Carlos saw something flicker in his expression, regret, maybe, or sorrow. Hope, Marcus said quietly. You have hope. And if I'm going to survive tonight, I need to remember what that feels like. Carlos didn't understand the words. Not fully. But he understood the look in Marcus's eyes. The same look his mother sometimes had when she tucked him into bed at night. The look of someone who is fighting to protect something precious, even if they weren't sure they would succeed. Okay, Carlos said. But you have to promise. You have to promise you'll come back. Marcus smiled, a real smile, the first one Carlos had ever seen on his face. I promise. He stood up and walked toward the estate, toward the lights, toward the chaos and the fire and the betrayal. Carlos watched him go, his mother's arms still wrapped around him, and felt something he couldn't name. It wasn't hope. Not exactly. It was something older, deeper. Something that came from watching a man walk into the mouth of hell to protect a child he barely knew, and it was enough. Marcus walked through the main entrance of the Astor estate like he owned it. Because he did. The marble foyer gleamed under the chandeliers, the same chandeliers that had cost him $500,000 and a favor from a Swiss art dealer who owed him everything. The guests were gone now. Herded, he knew, toward the east wing, toward the trap Vasquez had set. But the echoes of their laughter still hung in the air, ghostly and wrong. 2 gray-suit men blocked his path. Marcus recognized them. Low-level enforcers who had come up through the Brooklyn crew, ambitious but unremarkable. They hesitated when they saw him, their hands going to their jackets, their eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Mr. Webb," one of them said. "I'm supposed to be dead," Marcus smiled, and the expression was all teeth. "Yes, I heard that rumor. But as you can see, I'm still standing. Now step aside, or I'll put you both in the ground and use your bodies as a warning to the next 2 idiots who think they can block my path." The guards exchanged a glance. Marcus had built his reputation on promises like that, delivered with the same calm conviction. They had seen what happened to men who crossed him. They had heard the stories, but they had also heard Vasquez's promises. Promises of promotion, of protection, of power. The first guard's hand emerged with a weapon. The second followed suit at Marcus' side. "I was hoping you'd choose differently." He moved before they could fire, a single fluid motion, drawing his own weapon and taking them both out with 2 rapid shots to the knees. They crumpled to the ground, screaming, their weapons clattering across the marble floor. Marcus stepped over them without breaking stride and continued toward the east wing. The ballroom was a cavern of crystal and silk. 300 guests milled about in confusion, their glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos a stark contrast to the fear on their faces. Marcus spotted the governor near the grand piano, his phone pressed to his ear, his face pale. The attorney general was arguing with a security guard, her voice rising in shrill protest. And in the center of it all, directing the chaos with calm authority, stood Vasquez. He looked almost serene. His gray suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly coiffed, his smile a practiced mask of competence. When he saw Marcus, the mask flickered, just for a moment, just enough for Marcus to see the shock beneath. "Marcus." Vasquez's voice was smooth, controlled. "I thought you'd already evacuated." The threat assessment indicated. "Cut the shit." Marcus walked toward him, his weapon still in his hand, his eyes fixed on the man who had betrayed him. "I know about the thermite. I know about the wine cellar. I know about Dominic's wife in the underground garage. And I know you have 15 minutes to explain yourself before I put a bullet in your skull and let these fine people watch you bleed out on the parquet floor." The ballroom went silent. 300 faces turned toward him, their expressions a mix of shock, fear, and confusion. Vasquez's calm facade cracked, just slightly. "You don't understand," Vasquez said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This isn't about you. This was never about you. This is about an organization that has been corrupted from the inside, about a network of compromised officials and backroom deals that— Spare me the lecture." Marcus's voice was flat, cold. "I know exactly what this is about. It's about the $5 million that went missing from the offshore accounts last quarter. It's about the 12 shipments that were rerouted through Vasquez Holdings without my knowledge. It's about a man who got greedy and decided that killing his boss was easier than admitting failure." Vasquez's face went white. I knew the numbers didn't add up. I knew the manifests had been tampered with. I was waiting to see who would break first." Marcus allowed himself a thin smile. "I just didn't expect it to be you. You had so much potential. So much promise. And you threw it all away for what, a little extra cash, a taste of power you couldn't earn. Vasquez's composure finally snapped. You don't know what it's like, he shouted, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. You sit at the top of everything, handing out scraps to the rest of us, expecting gratitude for the crumbs you deign to offer. I built your empire. I ran your operations. I did everything you asked and more. And what did I get? A salary, a title, a corner office that was always a little smaller than yours. Marcus felt a cold clarity settle over him. This was the betrayal he had been waiting for, not the anger, not the greed, but the entitlement. The belief that loyalty was a transaction, that service deserved reward, that power was an entitlement rather than a trust. You are good at your job, Marcus said slowly. Better than most. But you were never leadership material. Not because you lacked skill, because you lacked perspective. You could see the numbers, but you couldn't see the people behind them. You could manage operations, but you couldn't inspire loyalty. And in this world, loyalty is the only currency that matters. He turned to face the assembled guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your evening. I'm afraid there has been an attempt on my life, orchestrated by a trusted subordinate who forgot his place. The threat has been neutralized. The building is safe. And I guarantee you that everyone responsible will be dealt with appropriately. The guests stirred, their fear beginning to fade into confusion. Vasquez took a step backward, his eyes darting toward the exits. Don't. Marcus's voice was soft, dangerous. You don't want to run. I've seen what happens to men who run for me. It's not pleasant. Vasquez stopped. His face was pale, his hands trembling. But something in his expression shifted. Not surrender, but calculation. He was still looking for an exit, still looking for a way out. Dominic's wife, Vasquez said, his voice cracking. You don't know where she is. You don't know how many guards I have. You don't know. I know everything. Marcus stepped closer, his weapon still trained on Vasquez's chest. I know she's in the underground garage. I know you have 7 guards stationed there. I know they're under orders to kill her if anything goes wrong. And I know you have 12 minutes to give me the order to stand down before I put you in the ground and find her myself. Vasquez's face twisted. You won't do it.
You need me.
You need me too. I don't need you for anything. Marcus's voice was flat, final. I never did. The only thing I needed was the truth. And now that I have it, you're useless to me. He raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger. The ballroom was silent, every eye on the 2 men at its center. And then the lights went out. The ballroom plunged into darkness. Marcus heard screams, the crash of furniture, the sound of bodies colliding in panic. He dropped into a crouch, his weapon still raised, his eyes straining to pierce the blackness. Vasquez was gone. Marcus felt something cold wrap around his chest. Not fear, not quite, but something close. The realization that his enemy was still out there, still dangerous, still capable of causing unimaginable harm. He had been so focused on the confrontation that he had forgotten the most important rule of this world. Never underestimate a desperate man. The emergency generators kicked in after 23 seconds. 23 seconds of screaming, crashing, and the sound of 300 people trying to kill each other in the dark. When the lights flickered back to life, the ballroom was a ruin. Chairs overturned. Crystal shattered across the floor. The governor flat on his back, his dignity in shambles. And Vasquez, nowhere to be seen. Marcus moved. He was already at the service door before the last guest had finished screaming, his weapon leading the way, his eyes scanning the corridor. The gray suit men had abandoned their posts. He could see that now, the empty doorways, the abandoned equipment. Vasquez had called them off. Or they had run. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was the garage. Sublevel 2. Dominic's wife. 7 guards. And now, less than 10 minutes before the thermite charges detonated, Marcus ran. The staircase to the garage was narrow, utilitarian, designed for service staff rather than the elite guests who occupied the floors above. His footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, a hollow rhythm that matched the pounding of his heart. He didn't slow down. He couldn't afford to. The garage was a cavern of shadow and concrete, the overhead lights dimmed to conserve energy. Marcus counted 6 vehicles, 3 armored SUVs, 2 sedans, 1 van that didn't belong. The van was parked near the exit, its engine running, its exhaust curling into the still air, and standing beside it, her hands bound behind her back, her face a mask of terror, was a woman Marcus recognized. Sarah, Dominic's wife. She had been part of this world for a decade, had hosted countless dinners, smiled through countless threats, never once complaining about the life she had chosen. Now she was a hostage to 7 guards, Vasquez had said. Marcus counted them as they emerged from the shadows. 5 men in gray suits, 2 in black tactical gear. They were positioned around Sarah, their weapons trained on her, their eyes scanning the garage for threats. They were good. Professional. But they weren't looking for the right threat. Marcus stepped out from behind the SUV, his hands raised slightly, his weapon visible but not threatening. "I'm here to make a deal." The guards tensed. Their weapons shifted toward him. One of them, the leader, stepped forward, his face impassive. "Mr. Webb, we were told you might come. Mr. Vasquez said you'd be predictable." "Vasquez doesn't know me as well as he thinks." Marcus kept his voice calm, easy. "But I know him. I know he promised you money, promotion, protection. I know he told you this was a one-time operation, that no one would get hurt, that you'd all be rich and free by morning." The guard's expression flickered. He said what he needed to say. "That's how this business works." "Does it?" Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Because in my experience, the business works because people keep their word. I've been in this world for 30 years, and I've never once broken a promise to a man who stayed loyal. Never once. Ask any of my people. Ask Dominic. Ask Morgan. They'll tell you the same thing." The guard's face was unreadable, but Marcus saw the doubt creeping in, the tiny shifts in posture that signaled uncertainty. "Vasquez," Marcus continued, "has been skimming from the accounts for over a year. He's been using the organization's resources to build his own power base, to line his own pockets. He's been setting all of you up to take the fall when this operation inevitably fails. And it will fail because it's built on a foundation of lies and greed." "He's not." The guard stopped himself. His eyes darted to Sarah, then back to Marcus. "He said you were the one stealing. He said you were planning to sell us all out to the feds." "Did he tell you about the thermite?" Marcus's voice was flat, cold. "Did he tell you he planted explosives in the wine cellar directly beneath the East Ballroom? Did he tell you he planned to kill 300 people, including women and children, to cover his tracks?" The guard's face went pale. "That's not. The charges are armed. They detonate in 6 minutes. And the only way to stop them is to get everyone out of the East Wing. Which means I need to get to the control panel in the wine cellar. Which means I need to go through you. So let me make this very simple." Marcus raised his weapon, aiming it directly at the guard's chest. "Let Sarah go. Let me pass. And I'll make sure you all walk out of here alive.
No retaliation. No gralles.
Just a clean exit, and a chance to start over somewhere else. That's my promise. And unlike Vasquez, I keep my promises." The guard stared at him. The seconds stretched, agonizingly slow. Marcus could feel the weight of time pressing down on him, the relentless tick of the countdown. "Sir," one of the other guards said, his voice hesitant. "He's telling the truth. I heard Vasquez talking to the demolition crew. He said the charges were for structural support. He said it was a controlled demolition, that no one would get hurt." "He lied." The leader's voice was quiet, resigned. "He lied about everything." He lowered his weapon. The other guards followed suit, their hands dropping to their sides, their expressions a mix of relief and shame. "Take her," the leader said, nodding toward Sarah. "Take her and do what you need to do. But if you're lying, if anyone gets hurt because of us, you have my word." Marcus moved past them, his hands already working on Sarah's bonds. She was trembling, her face wet with tears, but her eyes were clear and focused. "Dominic," she whispered. "Is he okay? He's fine. He's waiting for you upstairs." Marcus freed her hands and pulled her toward the stairwell.
Go.
"Find him. Get as far from the estate as you can." She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You're going to the wine cellar. I'm going to stop the detonation. Marcus met her gaze. Now go. I don't have much time. She ran. Marcus watched her disappear up the stairs, then turned and made his way toward the service elevator that led to the lower levels. He had 4 minutes. 4 minutes to reach the wine cellar, disarm the thermite charges, and stop the explosion that would destroy everything he had built. And somewhere in the shadows of the estate, Vasquez was still out there. Still dangerous. Still desperate enough to do anything. Marcus stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for sublevel 1. The doors closed with a soft hiss, and he felt the car begin its descent. 4 minutes. He had 4 minutes to save everyone who mattered. He had to make them count. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor that smelled of earth and old wine. Marcus stepped out, his senses on high alert, his weapon raised. The wine cellar stretched before him, a labyrinth of oak barrels and racked bottles, the air cool and damp and heavy with the scent of aging vintage. And in the center of it all, surrounded by a spider's web of wires and detonators, stood Vasquez. He looked different now. His immaculate suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild with a desperation that bordered on madness. In his hand, he held a small device, a detonator trigger, its red light blinking steadily. Marcus. Vasquez's voice was hoarse, almost conversational. I was wondering when you'd show up. 3 minutes. Marcus stepped forward, his weapon trained on Vasquez's chest. You have 3 minutes to stand down before I put a bullet in you. And if I press this button, Vasquez held up the detonator.
300 people die.
Your empire crumbles. Everything you've built turns to ash. Is that really the outcome you want? Marcus studied him, his mind racing. Vasquez was cornered, desperate, willing to do anything to survive. That made him dangerous. But it also made him predictable. You're not going to press that button, Marcus said quietly. You've already lost. Your men have surrendered. Your operation is compromised. Your escape route is blocked. The only thing you have left is that detonator, and you know as well as I do that pressing it means your own death. Vasquez's hand trembled. I'm dead anyway. You'll kill me the second I put this down. Probably. Marcus allowed himself a thin smile. But there are worse things than death, Vasquez. You know that better than anyone. There's the slow death of a man who's lost everything, his power, his reputation, his reason for existing. I could give you that instead. I could leave you alive, broken, a living monument to your own failure. The other man's face contorted. For a moment, Marcus thought he might actually press the button. But then Vasquez's shoulders sagged, and the detonator dropped from his fingers, clattering against the stone floor. I trusted you, Vasquez whispered. All those years, I trusted you. I thought you were building something real, something that would last. And then I saw what you really were, a paranoid tyrant who would destroy anyone who got too close. Is that what you told yourself? Marcus stepped forward, his weapon still raised. Is that how you justified the betrayal? By pretending I was the monster. It's the truth. Vasquez's voice cracked. You destroy everyone who gets too close. You did it to Dominic. You did it to Morgan. You would have done it to me eventually. I was just faster. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, not pity, just a deep, weary sadness. You're wrong, he said. I never would have destroyed you. I would have given you anything, money, power, respect. All you had to do was ask. All you had to do was stay loyal. Vasquez laughed. A bitter, broken sound. Loyalty. That's all you care about, isn't it? Loyalty to you. Service to you. A world built entirely around your ego. Marcus shook his head.
No.
A world built around trust. Around people who keep their word. Around the understanding that we're all in this together, that our survival depends on each other. You never understood that. You never wanted to. He reached down and picked up the detonator, carefully disabling the trigger mechanism. Then he turned to the thermite charges, studying the wiring with a practiced eye. The charges were sophisticated, military grade, designed to cause maximum structural damage. But Marcus had spent years studying demolition, had built his reputation on understanding the weaknesses of infrastructure. He could see the flaws in the setup, the points where a careful cut could render the entire system inert. "I can't disarm all of them," he said quietly. "Not in 2 minutes. But I can cut the main connection. That will stop the simultaneous detonation. Buy us time to evacuate the East Wing." "Buy us time for what?" Vasquez's voice was hollow. "You're still going to kill me. Probably." Marcus turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "But I'm going to give you a choice. You can stay here and face the consequences of your actions. Or you can run. Take your chances. See how far you get before my people find you." Vasquez's eyes widened. "You'd let me go. I'd let you try." Marcus smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "It's the only mercy I have left to offer. Take it or don't. I don't care either way." Vasquez stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and ran, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, disappearing into the shadows. Marcus watched him go, then turned back to the charges. He had 90 seconds. 90 seconds to cut the right wire, to stop the explosion, to save 300 lives. His hands were steady as he worked. He had faced worse odds. He had survived worse betrayals. This was just another challenge, another obstacle to overcome. And then he heard it. A sound that made his blood run cold. The soft click of a door opening behind him. "Don't move, Mr. Webb." Marcus froze. The voice was familiar. Young, high-pitched, trembling with fear. "Carlos, Carlos." Marcus kept his voice calm, steady. "What are you doing here? I told you to stay with your mother." "I had to come." The child's voice was shaking, but there was a determination in it that Marcus recognized. "I had to warn you. Vasquez, he's not leaving. He's going to the main ballroom. He's got more explosives. He's going to." Marcus turned slowly, his hands still raised. Carlos stood in the doorway, his small face pale, his eyes wide with terror. "The ballroom," Marcus repeated. "He's going to the ballroom," Carlos nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "He said he was going to take everyone with him. He said if he couldn't have the Empire, no one could." Marcus felt something crack in his chest. Not fear. Not anger. Understanding that Vasquez had never planned to escape. He had planned to take everything with him. The guests, the estate, the entire network of power that Marcus had spent a lifetime building. And the only person who knew, the only person who could stop him, was a 5-year-old child who had risked everything to deliver the warning. Marcus knelt down, his hands on Carlos's shoulders. "Listen to me. I need you to do something for me. I need you to run to the ballroom and warn everyone. Tell them to get out. Tell them there's a bomb." Carlos nodded, his face set with grim determination. "What about you? I'm going to finish this." Marcus gestured to the thermite charges. "I'm going to stop the detonation. And then I'm going to find Vasquez and make sure he never hurts anyone again." Carlos looked at him for a long moment, his eyes searching Marcus's face. Then he nodded again, turned, and ran up. Marcus watched him go, then turned back to the charges. 30 seconds. He had 30 seconds to stop the explosion. And then he had to save everyone who mattered. The wire was red. It was always red. In every movie, every story, every scenario where a man had to choose between life and death. Marcus stared at it for a fraction of a second, his mind cataloging the setup, tracing the path from the detonator to the charges. The red wire was the primary connection. Cutting it would stop the simultaneous detonation. But it would also trigger a failsafe, a secondary charge that would blow the wine cellar itself, collapsing the foundation and destroying the East Wing from below. And Vasquez had designed it that way. Of course he had. The man had planned for everything, every contingency, every possible outcome. He had built a trap within a trap, a maze of destruction that would leave no survivors. Marcus had 10 seconds. 10 seconds to find the secondary connection, to disable it before the failsafe triggered. His hands moved with practiced precision, following the wiring through the maze of bottles and barrels. And then he saw it. A small device, hidden behind a rack of vintage Bordeaux, its light blinking steadily. The secondary trigger. The one that would seal everyone's fate. Marcus reached for it, his fingers brushing against the plastic casing. "Don't." The voice came from behind him. Marcus turned slowly, his hands still raised, his heart pounding. Elena stood in the doorway, her face pale, her hands trembling. She was holding a kitchen knife, the same one she had been carrying earlier, its blade glinting in the dim light. Elena. Marcus kept his voice calm, steady. "What are you doing here? I had to come." Her voice was shaking, but there was a determination in it that he recognized. "I had to stop you. Vasquez, he told me what you really are. He told me about the things you've done, the people you've killed, the lives you've destroyed." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "Elena, that's not." "He showed me." Her voice cracked. "He showed me the records, the files, the names of the people you've murdered, the families you've ruined. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe you were different. But it's all true, isn't it? Everything he said. It's all true." Marcus looked at her, his mind racing. Vasquez had gotten to her, had twisted the truth, weaponized it, turned her against him. The same strategy he had used on Dominic, on the guards, on everyone who might have stood in his way. "Elena," he said slowly, "you're right. I've done terrible things. I've killed people. I've destroyed lives. I've built an empire on blood and betrayal. I won't deny it. I won't apologize for it. Because that's what it takes to survive in this world." Her grip on the knife tightened. "And you expect me to accept that, to just stand by while you—" "No." Marcus stepped closer, his hands still raised. "I expect you to understand that everything I've done to protect people like you. People who can't protect themselves. People who are caught in the crossfire of a war they never chose." Elena's face twisted. "That's a convenient excuse. That's what they all say. The powerful, the corrupt, the people who think they're above the law. They always say they're doing it for someone else." Marcus stopped. He was close enough now to see the tears streaming down her face, the trembling of her hands, the fear in her eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said quietly. "I'm not asking you to understand. I'm asking you to trust me. Just this once. Because right now, Vasquez is in the ballroom with explosives that will kill everyone in this building. And if I don't stop him, Carlos dies. Your son dies." Elena's face went white. "He wouldn't. He promised. He said. He lied." Marcus's voice was flat, final. "He lied about everything. He used you. He used your son. He used everyone who ever trusted him. And now he's going to burn this entire estate to the ground to cover his tracks." Elena stared at him, her eyes wide, her hands still trembling. Marcus could see the war happening behind her gaze, the battle between what she had been told and what she knew in her heart. "Please," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't have much time. I need to stop the detonation. I need to find Vasquez. And I need you to help me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she lowered the knife to— "What do you need me to do?" Marcus pointed to the secondary trigger. "I need you to hold this. Keep your finger on the button. If I cut the primary wire, it will trigger a failsafe. But if you hold the secondary trigger, it will buy me enough time to disconnect it completely." Elena's eyes widened. "You want me to? I need you to trust me." Marcus met her gaze, his own steady. "Just this once. Trust me, and I'll make sure your son survives tonight." She hesitated. Then she stepped forward and took the secondary trigger in her hands, her fingers pressing against the button. "Now," Marcus said, "when I cut the wire, you'll feel a vibration. Don't let go. No matter what happens, don't let go." Elena nodded, her face pale but resolute. Marcus turned back to the primary wire, his hand steady, his mind focused. He cut the wire. The vibration came immediately, a low hum that traveled through the floor, through the walls, through every surface in the wine cellar. Elena's hands tightened on the secondary trigger, her knuckles white, her face a mask of concentration. "Hold it," Marcus said. "Just hold it." He worked quickly, following the wiring to the secondary connection, his fingers tracing the path to the fail-safe mechanism. It was a delicate operation, one wrong move and the whole system would blow, but he had done this before. He had trained for this. He knew exactly what to do. With a final twist, he disconnected the secondary trigger. The vibration stopped. The hum faded. The wine cellar fell silent. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Then he turned to Elena, his face flushed with exertion.
It's done, he said.
The thermite charges are neutralized. The building is safe. Elena sagged against the wall, the secondary trigger falling from her fingers. She was shaking, her face wet with tears, her eyes wide with shock. Now, Marcus said, his voice hardening, I need to find Vasquez. I need to find him before he does something even worse. He turned and ran toward the ballroom, leaving Elena in the silence of the wine cellar. The ballroom was chaos. 300 guests were screaming, running, pushing against each other in a desperate attempt to escape. Marcus fought his way through the crowd, his eyes scanning for a familiar face. And then he saw him. Vasquez, standing on the stage, a device in his hand, his face a mask of triumph. Too late, Marcus, he shouted, his voice carrying over the noise. The failsafe is armed. The building is coming down. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. Marcus felt his heart stop. The failsafe. Vasquez had armed it. Had used the chaos to set another trap, another layer of destruction. He had to stop him. He had to stop him before it was too late. Marcus pushed through the crowd, his eyes fixed on Vasquez, his hand reaching for his weapon. And then he saw the other figure.
Small.
Terrified. Standing directly behind Vasquez, his eyes wide with fear, Carlos, the child, had come back. Had followed Vasquez into the heart of the chaos. Had put himself in the path of destruction. And Vasquez had seen him. Had taken him hostage. Don't move, Marcus. Vasquez's voice was cold, triumphant. Or the boy dies. Marcus froze. His hand dropped from his weapon. His heart pounded in his chest, the world narrowed to a single point of focus. The terrified child, the desperate man, the impossible choice. I'll do anything, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Just let him go. The ballroom had gone silent. 300 people stood frozen, their terror a tangible weight in the air. On the stage, Vasquez held Carlos against his chest, one arm wrapped around the child's throat, the other hand gripping a small black device. The detonator. The failsafe trigger that would bring the entire East Wing down. Marcus stood at the edge of the stage, his hands raised, his weapon holstered. Every instinct screamed at him to draw, to fire, to end this. But Carlos was in the way. Carlos was the shield Vasquez had always wanted. Let him go, Marcus repeated, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. This is between you and me. He has nothing to do with this. Vasquez laughed, a high, brittle sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Nothing to do with this. He's the reason you're still alive. He's the reason my perfect plan fell apart. Without him, you'd be dead, Marcus. Buried under the rubble with everyone else. Marcus's jaw tightened. The child in Vasquez's grip was trembling, his face pale, his eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that was almost unbearable. But he wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was watching, waiting, trusting. Your plan, Marcus said slowly, was never perfect. It was built on lies and greed, and the desperate hope that no one would notice your weaknesses. But I noticed. Everyone noticed. You've been slipping for months, Vasquez. Sloppy. Careless. Leaving trails I could follow with my eyes closed. Shut up. Vasquez's voice cracked. You don't know anything. You never knew anything. I was the one running your operations, making your deals, keeping your empire afloat while you sat in your ivory tower and pretended to be some kind of king. And you were good at it. Marcus took a single step forward. I'll give you that. You were competent, efficient. You had a talent for organization that I've rarely seen. But you never understood the most important part of this business. What's that? Vasquez sneered. The importance of loyalty, the value of trust. You've been selling that same tired line for years, and look where it's gotten you. A ballroom full of terrified guests. A building about to collapse. A 5-year-old boy who's about to die because you couldn't protect him. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not fear. Not anger. Something colder, more focused. The clarity that came when all other options had been exhausted, Loyalty isn't a line, he said quietly. It's a choice. A choice that people make every day, in small ways that you never notice. The maid who stays late to clean up after a party. The guard who patrols an extra hour because he knows you're worried. The child who risks his life to warn you about a threat you couldn't see. He took another step forward. Vasquez's grip on Carlos tightened, but the child didn't flinch. You never understood that, Marcus continued. You thought loyalty was something you could buy, something you could threaten, something you could demand. But it's not. It's earned. And you never earned it. Not from me. Not from anyone. Vasquez's face twisted with rage. You think you're better than me, you, who built an empire on blood and extortion, you, who killed your own father to take control of this organization, you. Stop. Marcus's voice was flat, final. You don't get to rewrite history to make yourself feel better. I killed my father because he was destroying everything we'd built, because he was selling us out to the highest bidder, because he had lost sight of what mattered. And I've carried that weight every single day. But I've never used it as an excuse. I've never pretended it was anything other than what it was. He took another step. He was close enough now to see the sweat on Vasquez's forehead, the tremor in his hand, the desperation in his eyes. Let the boy go, Marcus said softly. Let him go, and I'll give you a chance. A real chance. Not a trap, not a trick. Just a chance to walk away. Vasquez laughed again, but there was no conviction in it. You expect me to believe that after everything I've done? I expect you to remember, Marcus said, that I've never broken a promise. Not once. Not to anyone. And I'm not going to start tonight. For a moment, something flickered in Vasquez's eyes.
Doubt.
Maybe hope. The same uncertainty that had flickered in the guard's eyes earlier, the same crack in the facade of certainty. And then he saw the movement behind Vasquez. Small. Quick. A flash of gray in the shadows of the stage. Elena, she had followed him from the wine cellar, had made her way through the chaos, was now creeping toward her son with the stealth of a woman who had spent years learning to be invisible. Her hand was reaching for Carlos, her face a mask of desperate concentration. Marcus knew what he had to do. He had to keep Vasquez's attention focused on him. Had to give Elena the time she needed. You know what I don't understand, Marcus said, his voice conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. Why you thought this would work. Even if you'd succeeded. Even if you'd killed me and everyone else in this room. What was your plan after that? Vasquez blinked, thrown by the question. What, your plan? Marcus gestured vaguely. You kill me. You destroy the East Wing. The world thinks I caused some kind of catastrophic accident. But then what? Who takes control, who fills the vacuum? You can't just erase an entire organization and expect everything to fall into place. There are other players, other factions, other people who would have stepped into the void. Vasquez's grip on Carlos loosened slightly. There were arrangements, alliances, people who would have betrayed you. Marcus shook his head slowly. People who would have used you and discarded you the moment you stopped being useful. You never thought that far ahead, did you? You were so focused on destroying me that you forgot to plan for what came after. Shut up. Vasquez's voice cracked, his composure finally breaking. You don't know what I had planned. You don't know anything. Then tell me. Marcus's voice was calm, almost gentle. Tell me what you had planned. I want to understand. I want to know why you did this. Vasquez opened his mouth to answer. And in that moment of distraction, Elena moved. She lunged forward, her hands reaching for Carlos, pulling him out of Vasquez's grasp. The child stumbled, fell, scrambled to his feet, and ran toward the edge of the stage. Marcus drew his weapon. Vasquez saw the movement, his eyes widening with recognition. His hand tightened on the detonator. Don't, Marcus said, his voice flat and cold. Don't do it, Vasquez. The other man's face was a mask of rage and fear. He raised the detonator, his finger hovering over the button dot, and then he saw Carlos. The child was standing at the edge of the stage, his eyes fixed on Vasquez, his expression not of fear but of something else. Something that made Vasquez pause. Mr. Vasquez, Carlos said, his voice small but steady. Please don't. My mother is scared. The other people are scared. Please don't hurt them. Vasquez stared at the child. His hand trembled. The detonator wavered. And in that moment of hesitation, Marcus fired. The shot was clean, precise, aimed at Vasquez's shoulder. The detonator flew from his hand, clattering across the stage, its red light blinking once, twice, then fading to nothing. Vasquez crumpled to his knees, clutching his shoulder, his face contorted with shock and pain. The guests screamed, surged, began to flee in earnest. Marcus walked up to the stage and stood over his fallen enemy. He holstered his weapon and looked down at the man who had tried to destroy everything. "It's over," Marcus said quietly. "It's done." Vasquez looked up at him, his eyes filled with hatred. "You should have killed me. You should have, I know." Marcus knelt down, his face inches from Vasquez's. "But I'm not going to give you that satisfaction. You're going to live. You're going to rot in a cell for the rest of your life, and you're going to think about everything you lost, everything you threw away, every single choice that led you to this moment." He stood up and turned away. Elena was on her knees, her arms wrapped around Carlos, her body shaking with sobs. Marcus walked over to them and knelt down beside them. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft. Carlos looked up at him, his eyes still wide but steady. "I'm okay, Mr. Webb. I'm okay." Marcus reached out and placed a hand on the child's shoulder. "You were very brave tonight, Carlos. Braver than most men I've ever known." Carlos smiled, a small, fragile smile that made Marcus's chest ache. "I was just doing what you would have done." Marcus looked at the child for a long moment. Then he turned to Elena, who was watching him with an expression that was impossible to read. "I meant what I said," Marcus told her. "Your loyalty, your courage, the trust you placed in me, even when you had every reason to doubt. I won't forget it." Elena nodded slowly, her arms still wrapped around her son. "What happens now?" Marcus looked around the ballroom. The guests were gone, the chaos fading into the distance. The building was still standing. The threat was neutralized, but the empire was in ruins. Trust had been shattered. Everything he had built was teetering on the edge of collapse. "Now," Marcus said quietly, "we rebuild. We start over. We do it the right way this time." He stood up and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing through the empty ballroom. Behind him, the child's voice called out. "Mr. Webb." Marcus turned. Carlos was standing at the edge of the stage, his mother's hand in his. "I trust you," the boy said. "I trust you." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked out into the night. The morning light filtered through the windows of the Astor estate like a judgment. Pale, unforgiving, revealing every crack in the marble, every stain on the silk, every flaw that the night's darkness had concealed. Marcus stood in the center of the ballroom and surveyed the wreckage of his life. The guests were gone. The staff had been sent home. The security detail had been reduced to a skeleton crew of men he trusted absolutely, men who had been with him since the beginning, who had proven their loyalty through years of quiet service. The rest had been dismissed, their loyalty suspect, their futures uncertain. Dominic stood beside him, his face still pale from the ordeal of the previous night. Sarah was safe, recovering in a guest room upstairs. Morgan was already working on the legal fallout, crafting narratives, burying evidence, doing what he did best. And Vasquez was in a holding cell in the sub-basement, waiting for the reckoning that Marcus had promised. "The cleanup is going to take weeks," Dominic said, his voice hoarse. "The thermite charges did some structural damage, even without detonating. The East Wing is going to need significant repairs. And the guest list. The guest list is the least of our problems." Marcus's voice was flat, tired. "They saw what happened. They know there was a conspiracy. The story is going to get out, no matter what Morgan does." Dominic nodded slowly. "What about the organization, the other families? They're going to see this as a sign of weakness." "Let them." Marcus turned to face his operations chief. "Let them think we're weak. Let them make their moves. We'll be ready." Dominic studied him for a long moment. "You've changed. Last night, what happened down there in the wine cellar? I made a choice." Marcus's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. I chose to save the people who mattered, even if it meant losing everything else. And I'd make that same choice again. Dominic was silent for a moment. Then he nodded once and turned to leave. The door closed behind him, and Marcus was alone. He walked through the empty ballroom, his footsteps echoing off the crystal chandeliers. The tables were still set with the remnants of the meal that had never been served. The champagne was still chilled, the flowers still fresh, the candles still unlit. It was a tableau of a celebration that had never happened, a future that had been snatched away, and then he heard the sound. Soft, hesitant, coming from the service entrance. Marcus turned. Elena stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, Carlos hovered with the familiar wariness of a child who had learned to be invisible. Elena. Marcus's voice was gentle. I thought I told you to go home.
Get some rest.
I couldn't sleep. She stepped forward, her hands twisting together. I needed to see you, to speak with you. Marcus nodded slowly. He gestured to a nearby table, where a few chairs still stood upright. Sit down, please.
Elena hesitated.
Then she crossed the ballroom and sat, her posture stiff, her eyes fixed on the floor. Carlos followed her, hovering at her side like a small, watchful guardian. What do you want to say? Marcus asked, taking a seat across from her. Elena was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've been working for you for 7 years. 7 years, and I thought I understood you. I thought I knew what kind of man you were. But last night, you saw me at my worst. Marcus's voice was flat, unflinching. You saw the things I've done, the lives I've destroyed, the monster I've become.
No.
Elena looked up, her eyes fierce. I saw you sacrifice everything to save my son. I saw you walk into a trap that should have killed you because you couldn't let a child die. I saw you choose hope over vengeance, redemption over revenge. Marcus looked at her, his expression unreadable. That doesn't erase what I've done, the people I've hurt, the families I've broken. You know that. I know that you're not perfect. Elena's voice was steady now, filled with conviction. I know that you've done terrible things, but I also know that you're trying, that you want to be better, that you're willing to change. Marcus felt something crack in his chest. The carefully constructed walls he had built around himself, the armor he had worn for so long it had become a second skin. I don't know if I can change, he said quietly. I don't know if I can undo the things I've done. The damage is too deep, the wounds too old. Carlos stepped forward, his small hand reaching out to touch Marcus's arm. Mr. Webb, he said, his voice soft but clear, my mother says that everyone makes mistakes. She says the important thing is to learn from them, to be better. Marcus looked down at the child, at the innocence that had seen so much, the courage that had survived so much, the hope that had refused to be extinguished. Your mother is a wise woman, Marcus said, his voice rough. Carlos smiled.
She says you can be wise too.
If you try. Marcus laughed, a real laugh, the first one in years. It felt strange, foreign, like a language he had forgotten how to speak. Maybe I can, he said. Maybe I can try. Elena watched them, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. What happens now? To the estate, to the organization. Marcus looked around the ballroom. At the debris, the chaos, the shattered remnants of his empire. Now we rebuild, he said. But this time, we do it differently. We do it with trust, with loyalty, with the understanding that power isn't about control, it's about responsibility, about protecting the people who matter, even when it costs you everything. He turned to Elena, his eyes steady. I want you to stay. Both of you. I want you to help me build something new. Something better. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. I think, she said, I would like that. Marcus extended his hand. She took it, her grip firm and warmed, and in the ruins of the Astor estate, with the morning light streaming through the broken windows, Marcus Webb began the long, slow process of redemption. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. There would be setbacks, failures, moments when the old habits returned. The old darkness crept back in, but for the first time in years, Marcus felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. 3 months later, the Astor estate gleamed like a jewel against the gray winter sky. The repairs were complete, the east wing restored to its former glory. The crystal chandeliers sparkled with fresh polish. The marble floors reflected the light like mirrors. Everything looked the same as it had on the night of the failed coup, but everything was different. Marcus stood in the main ballroom, watching the preparations for the evening's gathering. It was a smaller affair this time. No senators, no syndicate bosses, just a handful of trusted allies and their families. A celebration of survival, of renewal, of the fragile new order that had emerged from the ashes of the old. Carlos was there, dressed in a crisp new suit, his small face alight with excitement. Elena moved through the room with quiet efficiency, directing the staff, checking the arrangements, her posture no longer tense with fear but relaxed, confident. She caught Marcus's eye and smiled, a warm, genuine expression that made his chest ache. They had come a long way, Mr. Webb. Dominic approached, his face somber. The transfer is complete. Vasquez is in federal custody. The prosecutor has agreed to the terms we discussed. Marcus nodded slowly. He had made a deal with the authorities. Vasquez would serve a life sentence, but the organization's more sensitive activities would be shielded from prosecution. It was the pragmatic solution, the one that preserved the empire while allowing him to rebuild it on a more ethical foundation. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pure. But it was a start. Thank you, Dominic, Marcus said. And thank you for your loyalty. Through everything. I know it wasn't easy. Dominic met his gaze, his expression unreadable. You saved my wife's life. You kept your promise. That's more than most men in this world would have done. Marcus nodded again. The weight of the past months pressed down on him, the accumulated toll of choices made and consequences faced. But there's a lightness beneath it now, a sense of purpose that had been missing for too long. Mr. Webb. Carlos appeared at his side, his small hand slipping into Marcus's. Are you ready for the party? Marcus looked down at the child. At the face that had seen too much, the eyes that held too much, the heart that had somehow remained pure despite everything. I think so, he said. Are you? Carlos nodded, his smile bright. Mama said I have to be on my best behavior. But she also said I can have 2 pieces of cake. Marcus laughed. The sound came easily now, naturally, a reflex that had become familiar over the past months. 2 pieces of cake. That sounds like a good deal. They walked together into the ballroom, where the guests were beginning to arrive. Dominic and Sarah, their hands intertwined, their faces peaceful. Morgan, his lawyer's demeanor softened by genuine warmth. Elena, standing by the door, her expression proud and watchful. And in the center of the room, a small table with 2 pieces of cake, waiting for a child who had earned every bite. Marcus stood at the edge of the room and watched them all. His people. His family, the empire he had built, not on blood and betrayal, but on trust and loyalty. The future he had chosen, even when it seemed impossible. The evening unfolded with a warmth that had been absent from the estate for years. Laughter echoed through the halls. Conversations flowed with genuine connection, not calculated maneuvering. The children played in the corners, their joy a reminder of what was worth protecting. Carlos eventually found his way back to Marcus's side, his face smudged with chocolate, his eyes bright with exhaustion. Mr. Webb, he said, his voice sleepy. Can I tell you something? Marcus knelt down to his level. Of course. Anything. Carlos leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. I knew you were a good person, even when everyone else was scared. Even when Mama was scared. I always knew. Marcus felt something catch in his throat. Why how? Carlos shrugged, the gesture impossibly casual for a child who had been through so much. Because you always looked at me like I mattered. Like I was important. And bad people don't do that. Marcus pulled the child into a gentle embrace, his eyes closed, his heart full. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for seeing me. For believing in me. For saving me. Carlos hugged him back, his small arms surprisingly strong. You're welcome, Mr. Webb. Later, when the guests had gone and the estate had fallen quiet, Marcus walked through the halls alone. The repairs were complete, but the ghosts remained, the echoes of the night that had changed everything. He stopped at the wine cellar, the door now sealed with a heavy lock. The thermite charges were gone, the wiring removed, the threat neutralized. But Marcus could still feel the weight of those moments, the pressure of the countdown, the terror of the choice. He placed his hand on the door and let himself remember. Not with pain, but with gratitude. For the warning that had saved him. For the child who had seen what others had missed. For the second chance that had been given to him, undeserved and unexpected. He turned and walked back toward the main hall, where Elena was waiting. "The children are asleep," she said, her voice soft. "All of them." Finally, Marcus smiled. "Thank you, Elena. For everything. For staying. For trusting me. For helping me become something better." She met his gaze, her eyes warm and steady. "You did that yourself, Mr. Webb. You chose to change. You chose to be better. All I did was give you a reason to try." "Sometimes that's all a person needs," Marcus said. "A reason. A hope. A chance." She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm and reassuring. And now, Marcus looked out the window at the city beyond, the towers, the lights, the empire he had built and nearly lost. It was still there, still powerful, still dangerous. But it was different now. He was different. Now, he said, we keep going. We keep building. We keep protecting the people who matter. And we never forget what we learned that night.
Elena nodded slowly.
Never forget. They stood together in the quiet of the estate, two people who had faced the darkness and come out the other side. The future was uncertain, the challenges ahead unknown. But they had something they hadn't had before: trust, loyalty, each other, and that was enough. The winter gave way to spring, and the Astor estate bloomed with new life. Gardens that had been neglected for years were restored, their flower beds bursting with color. The staff, once fearful and distant, moved through the halls with easy camaraderie. The empire, once built on fear, was slowly being rebuilt on something more lasting. Marcus stood on the terrace overlooking the city, the morning sun warm on his face. The skyline stretched before him, a testament to everything he had built and nearly lost. The towers still stood. The power still flowed. But the foundation had shifted, and he was learning to stand on ground that was more solid, more true. Footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn. "You're up early," Elena said, her voice soft. "The children are still sleeping." "The children," Marcus said, smiling, "are always the last to rise and the first to dream. That's how it should be." She came to stand beside him, their shoulders almost touching. The past months had changed them both, forged a bond that went beyond employer and employee, beyond obligation and duty. They had saved each other. They had grown together. They had become something neither had expected. "You're thinking about him again," Elena said. "Aren't you?" Marcus nodded slowly. Vasquez. The man who had tried to destroy everything. The man who had forced him to see himself clearly, to confront the darkness he had carried for so long. "I think about him every day," Marcus admitted. "Not with anger. Not with hatred. Just as a reminder. A reminder of what I could have become. What I almost was." Elena reached out and took his hand. "And what are you now?" Marcus looked at her, at the city, at the future stretching before them. "I'm a man who learned to trust. A man who learned to hope. A man who finally understands that power is nothing without the people who stand beside you." He turned to her fully, his eyes searching hers. "I've spent my whole life building walls, Elena, protecting myself from the world, keeping everyone at a distance. But you and Carlos, you showed me a different way. You showed me that there's something worth protecting beyond the empire, beyond the power, beyond the fear." Elena's eyes glistened. "And what's that?" Marcus smiled, the expression warm and genuine. "Family.
Trust. Love.
The things that matter, even when everything else falls apart." She stepped closer, her hand still in his. "So, what now? What happens next?" Marcus looked out at the city, at the future he had chosen. Now, he said, we build something new, something lasting, something that will survive us. A legacy not of fear, but of hope. Not of control, but of trust. Not of power, but of protection. He squeezed her hand gently. And we do it together. Elena smiled, a real smile, full of light and promise. Together, she repeated. They stood in silence, watching the sun rise over the city. The past was behind them, the future uncertain. But they had each other, and the children, and the fragile, precious hope that had been born in the darkness of a night that should have destroyed them all. It was enough. It was more than enough that Marcus Webb had spent a lifetime building an empire. But it had taken a child's courage and a woman's trust to show him what truly mattered. And now, with the sun rising on a new day, he was ready to build something far more important, a home.